I still can't work out how it's 6 million.
No, can I? It's gone from 1.9 to 6.
I can't work that out. I know it's not like the community hall, but I look at a structure and
It's the gold hinges.
there's something.
Something wrong.
Oh.
Kia ora tātou, nau mai haere mai, talofa lava, and welcome to our council meeting of Wednesday the 1st of June 2022. Before we get into the order of business, councillors, look, obviously the meeting has been recorded and will be live streamed on the council's YouTube channel. Health and safety, we'll just get that up. So obviously around our fire and emergency, unlike the event of an emergency, go to the green signalled exits and evacuate to the assembly area, which is the clock tower in the square, Te Marae o Hine. The building is obviously a non-smoking facility. Again, unlike the event of a need for a defibrillator, that is located in the front of house on the ground floor. And any near misses, please report them to our council administration. Obviously, while we're still in the COVID-19 protection framework, please acknowledge those settings. And to our participants online, obviously keep your cameras on and microphones muted unless addressing the meeting. And councillors will be using our voting devices today. And if I could just ask councillors online and any presenters in the room, please, if they could give their names before speaking and to use a microphone. All right. Councillors online today are Councillor Johnson, Councillor Bowen and Councillor Dennison. And we'll now move forward to the order of business. And our first one is around apologies. And we have a couple there, Councillor Renee Dingwell and Councillor Beattie for early departure. I'm quite happy to move those, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. No comments, questions to those. We will vote, please. And that has passed 15 votes for and none against. Thank you. Right, moving through to notifications of additional items, late items. There has been none signalled, nothing off the floor. So we'll move through to the next one, which is around declarations of interest. Oh, okay. Look, I just want to obviously declare interest in items 5 as the Performing Arts Trust. I'm a member of that, ex officio there for the council, and obviously I'm involved in number 6, which is around international travel. So I'll declare an interest on those. And Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to, for item 9, which is the Keisha Birch trust deed, I just want to declare that I am a recently appointed trustee, but I don't see it conflicting with my contribution to that item.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Dingwell is as well, but obviously not here, and obviously myself as well. Okay, I will, during those items, I will default to the Deputy Mayor to chair the meeting, which she's agreed to. Thank you. Okay, we'll move forward to confirmation of the minutes. And it's around resolving that the minutes of the council meeting of the 4th of May 2022, part 1, public be confirmed as a true and correct record. I'm happy to move those, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Are there any matters arising? There being none, we'll look to vote, please. Can we just check you voted online, please? We've got it, thank you. That's passed, 15 votes for and none against. Right, we'll move through to number 5, and because of my interest there, I will vacate the chair. I'll pass to the Deputy Mayor.
Right, so looking at item 5, we're on page 15, and we have got the report exemption of the Palmerston North Performing Arts Trust from being a council-controlled organisation, and that is presented by Hannah White, Democracy and Governance Manager.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Councillors, you'll notice there's a variety of trust-related items on today's agenda, and this is the first one for you. You'll remember that we received the annual report and financial statement of accounts from the Performing Arts Trust in December, and the LGA requires us every 3 years for the council by resolution to agree whether it wants to continue to exempt a CCO from the obligations set out in the Local Government Act. So that's to exempt them from obligations on a statement of intent, the 6 monthly and annual reporting requirements of the audited finances, etc. So this has been done every 3 years since 2004 for this trust, and we don't see any reason to change it at this time.
Thank you, Hannah. Councillors, are there any questions? Councillor Butt.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was just wondering whether we need to put the start date in this resolution. It says for 3 years from to 30th June.
So when does the exemption expire?
The 30th of June this year. Well done, spotting the grammar mistake. We could just remove the word from, just say to.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
There aren't any further questions. Thank you, Hannah. Councillor Harpiter.
I'm happy to second this if you were going to move it.
Okay, well, I'll move it. And seconded by Councillor Harpiter. Thank you. Is there anyone wishing to make a comment? Councillor Harpiter.
I think this is really sensible for this organisation, so I'm really happy to support this. Thank you.
Perfect. Great. With no one else wishing to comment, the recommendation in front of us is that Council exempt the Palmerston North Performing Arts Trust from being a council-controlled organisation for 3 years to 30 June 2025 pursuant to Section 7 of the Local Government Act 2002. That is moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Harpiter, and I will invite you to vote. That has carried 100%. Moving on to item 6, approval of international travel for the Mayor, November 2022, and we have got both Gabrielle and Hannah presenting this one, our International Relations Manager and Democracy and Governance Manager.
Kia ora koutou, councillors. Thank you. So the report is quite a straightforward and short one. So I'd like to bring to your attention 2 points. The first one is that since the submission of this report, we have received confirmation from CEDA that they want to send their CEO to join the delegation. Massey University has also indicated that they would like a representation during the visit. IPU has also indicated the same thing. And the second thing I'd like to bring to your attention is the possible signing of city partnership between Palmerston North and Wageningen. I am in communication with the Netherlands Embassy here in Wellington and also the New Zealand Embassy over there in the Netherlands, both of which are very supportive of this. And then, of course, with the 40th anniversary celebration between Missoula and Palmerston North, we are planning to sign a reaffirmation of our connection for the two cities during this visit as well. So all the details for the trips it's included in the report, and I am happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Hannah, did you have anything to add at this stage?
No, I'm just happy to answer questions.
Perfect. I do have a question around the, I guess, the itinerary scheduling. I'm just wondering what the rationale is for having such a short window in the Netherlands. It's a very tight schedule, but then there's quite an extensive amount of time allocated to the America aspect of the trip.
So it really is based on how our relationship has developed over the years with these two cities. So for the Netherlands, at the moment, we only have an initial potential signing of the partnership with Wageningen. It will be, if it does happen, if it does go ahead, then it will be focusing on the signing ceremony and focusing on the food strategy development, connecting partnerships, but there won't be any sort of expectations on more concrete actions on how we develop it until further discussion. Whereas with Missoula, the relationship is established, and we can go much further and deeper into how we can connect and expand our collaboration.
Okay, thank you, that makes sense. And in terms of the timing, the draft dates, has anything changed since the agenda's been printed?
Yes, so we have now got a couple of meetings confirmed. So in Wageningen, we are now confirmed to meet with the mayor and deputy mayor there on the 13th of November. That's a Monday, if I'm not mistaken. And the timing of that is from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. We're also in process of getting other meetings confirmed in Wageningen and other places too.
Okay. And so then a question for you, Hannah, is how does the timing of the proposed itinerary fit within what assumptions are currently being made around both the induction schedule plus the normal council business that resumes after the new council are sworn in?
The timing of the trip has certainly been allocated according to the schedule of the partners rather than the schedule of the council. Those around the table will be fully aware of what November looks like following the election. At this stage, we can't notify the meeting for the inaugural council meeting yet. There's rules in the Local Electoral Act that we have to follow for that, but we're expecting that would be the 27th of October, so that would be prior to this trip. November has in practice been the time when the new mayor has set up their committees and the committee structure for the triennium. Potentially that would have to be delayed to being in the new year, the February kind of meeting of council with a new mayor to be travelling at that time. But council itself would need to continue to meet, so whoever was appointed the deputy mayor would need to chair council meetings in that period if the committee structure hadn't been set up.
Thank you. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. Just a few questions. Firstly, the timing of the trip, and you mentioned that CEDA and Massey and IPU would like to also join the delegation. Has the timing been initiated by council and then CEDA and Massey and IPU have decided to join, or would they be going on a trip whether council went or not?
So I understand your question as did council initiate the timing and then the rest of the delegates join?
Yeah.
So the timing of this trip has been proposed based on multiple discussions with our overseas partners, and with the purpose to be able to combine trips together to minimize expenses. So it has been multiple discussions with multiple partners to find the optimal timing for all. Then Massey, IPU and CEDA have been invited to comment on the timing and how that works in with their own schedule. So they have also agreed that this timing works for them.
Okay, thank you. And in terms of the signing of the partnership agreement in Wageningen, is that something that could happen at another time, or is that time sensitive? Does that need to happen in November?
So our relationship with Wageningen started in 2016, but it has been an informal relationship. It has never been formally recognized. And so this year, we really like to push for the both city councils, especially Wageningen, to formalize it and recognize that.
So I'm aware of the relationship with Wageningen. It actually goes quite a long time before 2016. But my question is, does the signing of the partnership agreement have to happen in November?
I think that the signing, after so many years, should happen as quickly as possible to start opening doors, especially with the introducing the food strategy, giving the solid foundation for this partnership to flourish.
Okay, sorry, I'm not sure if I'm not asking my question
I
clearly.
think the question's probably been answered in an indirect way.
Okay.
No, it does not need to happen
Okay.
in November, but it is very desirable to happen in November.
Okay, thank you. Just moving to a different point, the Prime Minister's visit to the US this week, there's been a lot in the news about the members of the delegation who've tested positive for COVID and they've needed to isolate, and that's been a little bit disruptive to the travel. Has there been any consideration of how that might be managed for any trip or delegation, or has that been factored into perhaps the costs as well if members are needing to isolate?
The short answer is yes. So we are planning the trip with our travel partners, and we are looking at travel insurance policies that covers pandemic condition. Also, there's a whole lot of things that we can do virtually nowadays. So we will be able to minimize the impact of that on our work, should that happen.
Okay, and just final question. The paper identifies the issues around the timing in bullet point 1.10 on page 20, obviously with it coinciding with the team building period and settling in of new members. Given that point, is there a reason why there isn't an option being provided in this paper for the travel not to proceed at the proposed time?
Thank you, Councillor Naylor. Through you, Deputy Mayor. So the paper itself is not requesting permission to travel. The paper for the delegation to go, the paper is requesting permission for the Mayor to travel, which is required under the expenses policy. So that's why there's no recommendation in the direction that Councillor Naylor is asking the question.
Okay, thank you. That's all from me.
Thanks,
And
Hannah.
perhaps just to note at this time, Madam Chair, that I do have an alternate recommendation that's not in the papers.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Hannah, just to clarify your response to Councillor Naylor's final question. So the delegation is going to proceed regardless, because that's an operational matter, essentially. It's around whether the Mayor is included in the delegation.
The reason the paper has been brought is to request permission from the Council as to whether the Mayor should join the delegation.
Thank you. Councillor Harpiter.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor, and thanks to Hannah and Gabrielle for the paper. Just one point of clarification. When was the last time a group from the Council and the joint group in terms of CEDA, Massey and others actually went on a trip like this?
So my understanding, as this preceded my time being here at the council, but my understanding is that the last trip that a delegation like this traveled overseas was in 2018, and the destination included Missoula.
Missoula only?
I understand there was a little bit of time spent in China as well, but I wouldn't be able to confirm the details until I could go back and check on that.
And the importance to Council, would you be able to give us a comment on the importance to Council of a trip like this?
It definitely is very important, especially when we talk about recovery post-pandemic. The trip, as you could see from the report, focuses on 3 points. First of all, is the recovery of the international education sector. Second of all, is about opening doors for our food strategy to take wings. And third of all, we would like to place a more importance on exchanging ideas and exploring possible projects in terms of city sustainable development. And that's why we want to initiate further discussions with our overseas partners to explore in this area too.
Thank you. Final question. Thanks, Deputy Mayor. The importance of having the Mayor on the trip, in your opinion?
I think if we are talking about signing of partnerships and reaffirmation of partnership after 40 years friendship, an international relation manager can hardly represent the city. Therefore, I believe that the presence of the Mayor will definitely lift the profile of this trip as it deserves, and it will be able to give the representation of the city and show respect to our overseas partners.
Thank you, Gabrielle. Thank you, Hannah. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And following the questions I think that you started, and Councillor Naylor has picked up on 1.10. So a question to Hannah, I think, is really about what you talked about earlier, Hannah, the impact on the programme of council left behind. So the impact on induction, impact on the setting up of meetings. I just wasn't clear from your earlier question, answer to the question. Are you suggesting that the mayor doesn't need to be there for the induction to go ahead, or that the council, I wasn't clear on that. Can you clarify what the impact would be on that November time period for the new council?
Through you, Deputy Mayor. So a couple of key dates and stages in that period. So there's the inaugural council meeting, which at this stage we're hoping we'll be able to have in October, so before this visit is planned. The formal induction that the Chief Executive runs for all elected members following the election. We are still in planning of that phase, but at this stage, planning for mornings of 2 weeks in October, again before this trip. But then, of course, there's absolutely ongoing induction of members, in particular members who haven't been at the table before, and that will certainly be continuing through November, December, and even into February. There are some general induction matters and team building days that we're planning at this stage in early December and early February. So those wouldn't be affected. However, the business of council in November would need to continue. So council would need to meet, and if the mayor was not here to chair council, then that would fall to the deputy mayor of the time. What I was alluding to earlier is the committee structure itself in the last triennium, this current triennium was set up in November. That wouldn't be able to happen if the mayor was busy travelling, so we would have to put that off probably until the new year. So council itself would meet without committees necessarily meeting.
So what would be the impact of that, Hannah?
The ultimate impact of that is all business would have to come through council, and council would have to meet more regularly over that period.
Okay. And for the mayor's own commitments to induction, things like mayor school, which we don't control, how is that impacted by this?
That's set for the data that is set, and it's the Tuesday and the Wednesday prior to must be directly following the Thursday where the election results are out. So again, that's in October.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. Back to you, Madam Chair.
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and thanks, Hannah and Gabrielle. My question is around the total cost of this trip. So in our paper, we've got the cost of the mayor's portion, I presume. What's the total cost of this trip?
Thank you, Councillor. So at the moment, we cannot give you an exact number of how much the trip will cost, because all travel quotes are only subject to changes at the time of purchase. So we haven't purchased anything, but we are expecting the expenses to be around the $40,000, including expenses paid for the mayor and the mayor's partner.
And what budget is this coming from? Is this from the international relations budget?
That is correct. It is our operational budget.
And the intention, I assume from the itinerary, is that two officers of council would accompany the mayor and the mayor's partner. Is that right?
Yes, so we have myself as international relations, and we also have the international relations and education advisor role to be going on this trip to cover the international education portfolio.
Okay, so two staff members, plus the mayor, plus the mayor's partner.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Now, in terms of the timing of this trip, given that we don't know who the mayor will be until after the election, has any thought been given to postponing this trip so that discussions can be had with the new mayor as to whether or not that person would think that this is a priority. For example, you know, this is arranged for very soon after the election. If the new mayor isn't inclined to take up this trip, then that could be potentially embarrassing and possibly result in a loss of booking. So, how is it that the timing is so close after the election and not further out? I'm really struggling with the timing of this.
Thank you, Councillor. So if you look at 3.2, it does state that any bookings will be refundable in case the newly elected mayor decides not to take part in this trip. And if he or she will decide to appoint somebody else to represent the new mayor to go on this delegation.
Yes, I did see that. I have read the report, but you haven't answered my question. Why did you not consider doing this trip next year or at some point in the future after consultation with the newly elected mayor?
Definitely, we have thought of different timing opportunities for this trip to happen, and the timing has been discussed with multiple stakeholders to be decided at this point, because not only does it suit with our partners, but also it serves well the purpose for recovery on our part. So in order, for example, in order for our international education to recover by the time of semester 1, 2023, and at the moment there is another discussion going for a refreshed draft of international education strategy nationally, the timing of this trip is well in line with that strategy and to show the very timely support of Council to this heavily impacted sector.
So do you have some concrete goals or concrete outcomes that are expected from this trip that you will use to gauge whether or not this trip has been a success, for example?
Councillor, as stated, this trip has 3 purposes, and we will measure the success of this trip accordingly. However, it has always been very difficult to measure how relationships are. So I'm not sure how we would gauge that particular point. I do think that the international relations and international education has been very highly valued in the city and by councillors. So therefore, I think the impact will be, the success of this trip will be rather shown in the recovery and subsequent partnerships that resulting from it.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair.
Councillor Barrett.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Most of the matters of substance have been covered through questions. I'm just left with one question around section 2.7 and was just hoping to clarify that sentence and that it makes a specific reference to ag research, which is a Crown Research Institute rather than a field of endeavor in my understanding of it. So could you just clarify what is intended by 2.7 and who is involved in that partnership and what the focus of that partnership is?
Thank you, Councillor. That's probably was the typo. So it's not intended to regard to ag research as the institution, but rather the field of research. So it's agricultural research and food technology.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councillor Meehan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is around 1.8. Is it common practice for the Mayor's partner to cover their own international costs?
Through you, Madam Chair. The expenses policy currently allows that should the spouse travel with the Mayor, that the spouse's expenses would be covered, whether that was international travel or domestic travel, whether that was to a conference. So your current policy allows for the spouse to be covered.
So can I understand why the spouse in this situation is covering their own international costs?
So according to the elected and appointed members' expenses and allowance policy, we would have to cover the mayor's partner. In this case, the presence of the partner isn't necessarily required for formal functions. Therefore, we are proposing that the partner, should they choose to come, will cover their own international flights, and we would cover the accommodation, incidentals, and meals cost under our operational budget.
Thank you. If I look at the itinerary, does the Mayor's partner have a role to play?
Thank you, Councillor. I think that while in many cases the formal agenda doesn't state that the partner is required to be there, but in terms of relationship building, for it to appear less transactional, it always helps to have the partner there. And also, I think the mayor and his or her partner could show a very united front to represent the city. So the presence of the partner on delegations like this is encourageable.
Thank you.
Councillor Butt.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Gabrielle, for the report. Just following Councillor Naylor's question and your response to buying a special insurance for the travel, 1.6 on page 20 has described the approximate cost of the whole travel, 10,000 to 13,000. It doesn't mention any insurance. Is that insurance money on top of this figure, or includes insurance?
It is included in that.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Beattie.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Gabrielle, for your report. The international students is one of the focus. So currently, what's with Missoula and the Netherlands, how many international students have we got currently from those two areas?
Thank you, Councillor, for your question, to which I don't have the answer right in front of me. I can only tell you that the partnership between Massey and Wageningen is not only about the international student number that's exchanged between the two universities, but also around academic exchanges and collaboration work in the field of research, and especially within the food institutes, that's Food Valley in Wageningen and Food HQ here. In Missoula, Massey has partnership with two universities there. Especially the stronger one is the University of Montana. And so that one we are hoping to gain some international recruitment out of.
Thank you.
Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Just wanted to inquire about, has there been consideration for Rangatane to join the delegation, understanding in 2.2 it's referenced the benefit of the Indigenous culture being part of that relationship strengthening. Has that been considered?
Yes, it has been considered very carefully, and after many discussions with our partner in Missoula. As you know, both cities have very strong connections in terms of Indigenous culture, and the visits, the mutual visits that's happened in the past have only deepened that connection. However, this is also a part of mitigating the risk of traveling immediately post-COVID pandemic. So we are deliberately trying to keep the size of the delegation to the minimal in order to mitigate that risk.
Okay, thank you.
Just a follow-up question to what Councillor Dennison's just asked. Within the delegation, whether it's the council delegation or the potential wider delegation who are representing both Palmerston North and New Zealand, is there anybody within that delegation who can offer a Te Ao Māori perspective on any discussions or opportunities?
Thank you. So the person itself isn't identified at this stage. However, there has been conversations around how we can better represent the city and the Māori culture in the delegation, but also we are looking at virtual joint events and meetings as well, so that we can incorporate as much of the culture and the representation.
Okay, so the key events themselves will actually be virtual. I mean, there'll be some people there in person, but there'll be virtual events that people could attend online.
Yes, correct.
Councillors, are there any other questions? There's a few of you that have been jumping in and out, so I'll just double check before we close questions. Perfect, thank you, Gabrielle and Hannah. So we have a recommendation from Councillor Naylor, which I haven't seen, but I believe, okay, there we go. So, okay, so it's got a mover and a seconder, so that council agree that travel overseas in November 2022 will not proceed. Can I just clarify, is this for the Mayor or is this for anyone?
It's for anyone.
Okay, I'll hand it over to you to speak to that, Councillor.
Thank you. Our history with our sister city in Missoula has obviously got a long history, coming up 40 years, and the history, the relationship building with Wageningen has also been developing over quite some time, over 10 years now. And those relationships are important. If there is to be a delegation to those cities, and if there is to be an agreement signed with Wageningen, the Mayor absolutely should be there. And I appreciate the comments that Gabrielle made in terms of it being an issue of respect, actually, that the Mayor should be there at that occasion. I realise there are some timing issues for Missoula in terms of their timing. In terms of proceeding with this trip at this time, I think the timing absolutely does not work for this council. And my reason for that is, obviously, as it's been acknowledged and is acknowledged in the paper, that's the post-election settling in period. And not only will we have new people around the table, we will also have the first ever 2 Māori ward councillors around the table. And I think it's a very high priority for the Mayor to be investing in that early stage of the relationship and the team building and the development of how this council will work in the next triennium. So it's for for those reasons, as well as there's a few other perhaps less, more minor issues, but not insignificant. Being the issue of COVID and travelling at the moment, it's not. It's very clear that there is a risk of interruption due to COVID, and we need to realise that that also comes with it a risk for additional costs, which may not have already been factored into the estimate of around 40,000. So but primarily my reason for proposing this alternate recommendation at the moment is in terms of the timing. So the resolution is that international travel will not proceed in November. And whilst I recognise that this paper makes an assumption that officers would still proceed with a trip under option B, I think that is incredibly inappropriate given what is being proposed.
Thank you, Councillor. I am just going to ask the acting Chief Executive to comment, considering this is actually it includes operational direction as well. So I'll just hand it to Cheryl Bryant.
I think in terms of listening to the intent of the recommendation, it would probably be appropriate to clarify that that this relates to a city delegation in terms of overseas travel, and that if your intent is to actually have this covering staff, that really is in the decision of the Chief Executive. So you'd probably want to put a recommendation to the Chief Executive so that you can actually clarify that that decision rests with the Chief Executive as a staffing matter.
So are you suggesting some additional words to the recommendation to clarify that?
If that is your intent, I would suggest that you clarify that the Council agree that a city delegation for overseas travel in November would not proceed, and recommend to the Chief Executive that that staff do not attend such a delegation.
I'm happy with that adjustment in the wording if administrative staff have caught that.
Can I get you to write that out, Councillor,
Sure.
just so that we can capture that? And can I just clarify, Cheryl? Thank you. Is within the recommendation, it would be essentially requesting the Chief Executive that the delegation doesn't go ahead, but ultimately is the Chief Executive's decision as to whether it proceeds or not?
That is correct when it relates, because the decision of this council relates to the mayor's travel, and that so procedure of the delegation, whereas it involves staffing, is the Chief Executive's decision. You may want to clarify that you're really relating to the timing of this as well.
We're just going to pause for a moment while we tidy up some recommendations. Okay, so we've tried to...
Madam Chair, that was not the wording. The first half was meant to remain as it was.
Okay, one moment. Councillor, are you happy with that wording?
Yes, might just need to check with the seconder as well because she hasn't had an opportunity to have
Yes,
some
I will
input.
do that. So I'll just read it out. The alternative motion is that Council agree the travel overseas in November 2022 will not proceed and that Council instruct the Chief Executive not to send a delegation at this time. So that has moved by Councillor Naylor. Councillor Johnson, can you confirm if you're happy to second that?
Yes, I am.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson, Councillor Naylor, are there any other comments you want to make on the recommendation given it's slightly different? Thank you. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There are a number of reasons why I'm not happy to support this travel at this stage. That's not to say I would never be happy to support it. But it's primarily an issue of timing, perception and pandemic. So in terms of timing, I think the timing of the Mayor being away at a crucial point where we're just setting up a new council and a new committee structure is extremely undesirable. And in fact, you know, as I think we all reflected this term, those first couple of months of team building, getting to know one another and learning to work together are an extremely important time to be able to develop a functioning council elected member team. And I think to have the Mayor absent during that time and the consequent effect on committee structure and delaying of really getting going with council until the following February, I think is not desirable and should be avoided if at all possible. The other issue about timing is that this is being arranged for a new mayor and a new council. We don't know at this stage what the priorities of that new council might be and whether or not they might feel that this was an appropriate trip. But if we were to approve it today, by the time the new mayor and new council were considering it, it will be very close to the actual date of travel and could cause some reputational damage by cancelling. So I really think the timing is leaves a lot to be desired. The second issue is around perception. We have just spent 2 full days in a grueling annual budget debate, looking at costs line by line, trying to make savings. I recall that myself and Councillor Naylor did try and make some savings on international relations, but that was not supported. And here we are the very next week looking at signing off international travel for the Mayor and the Mayor's partner. It's just not a good look. I don't think I need to explain this to you, councillors, but you know, at a time when ratepayers, every single one of them feeling the pain of cost of living increases, combined with a particularly I don't even know how to express it, but, you know, a valuation that has landed a lot of people with rates increases much higher than they would have been expecting, and many of them are unable to pay. For us to sign off international travel for the Mayor barely a week later, I don't think is a very good look. And so I'm certainly not going to be supporting it on that basis. And then the comment was made by the officer that this is a post-COVID environment. It's not a post-COVID environment. Millions of people are still infected with COVID. In our own country, we have 40 people dying every day with COVID. And I do think that the perception that we're somehow over COVID or it's no longer an issue is very misleading. And international travel at the moment should be really for absolute essentials. This is something, as the officer said, some of it can be done virtually, and we've got good technology for doing things virtually these days. And I would encourage those options to be used at this stage. And this trip could be reconsidered at a later date when I think the timing will be better. So I'm not, the reason for the advice to the CE to not send staff is that I think I do agree with the officers that if you're going to do a trip like this, it's better to send the mayor with the staff. And so sending staff on their own may give the wrong message. So I would be inclined to postpone the whole thing and let's wait until we're in a better position to know whether or not the new mayor and new council supports this as a priority, when it's safer to travel, and when cost is not such a pressing burden on ratepayers in the city. Thanks.
Councillor Harpeter.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor. I will not support this recommendation. If it fails, I would look to move recommendations 1 and 2. I think that this kind of this is just, for me, this feels quite political. I do think that this is a budgeted trip, budgeted for the officers and budgeted for the mayor. So it's not looking at trying to get extra money. This is something that's actually in the budget. I think this is something for the city. This is an economical trip that we are trying to bring students into the city for our economy. So this is trying to open it up so that we can actually have more students for the city and open things up. And having a trip with Massey, Cedar, the Redette Institute is trying, and also opening up the relationship for the sister cities. The last trip that we had was in 2018, so that's quite a long time ago. And I know we've had the pandemic, but it is, if the Prime Minister can travel at this time, it is time for us now to start travelling as well. So I think that's the lead that we take. We take the lead from the Prime Minister. We need to start opening ourselves up. We need to start looking at what we can do as a city, and we need to start shining. And that's what we need to start doing. So I will completely look at moving that recommendation and hoping we get the support around the table to do that. Thank you.
Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I was 2 points I just want to raise on. One is the timing around the election, post-election cycle and the setting up committee structure. That's one thing. The other one is, do we still carry on and do international travel? And I see that as the second point. So I'll speak to the second one in my mind first around the international travel. I'm actually very comfortable in a world that we're living with COVID to still activate some of our key relationships globally. So I'm very comfortable around a small delegation. There's been some consideration of the size of it, and the purpose of going has been outlined. Wageningen is a leader of food science and technology, recognised leader in Europe and one of the leading in the world. And our connection with food innovation at Massey and the Redette Institute is very key. It's been highlighted when Steve Mahari was the Vice-Chancellor, and I only want to extend on that with opportunities for our region, and actually as New Zealand Inc. I think we've got a real place to play in that. And then with Missoula, it's interesting, the 40-year anniversary being significant, and we've always held a pretty close relationship with Missoula, so I'm very keen to keep a connection going. It just comes around to timing, and so when we're having a recommendation to not proceed at all, I just get really stuck with that, and so I'm going to oppose the recommendation that's before us at the minute. I'd rather see a if it's not going to be in the November time window, at least be open for it to be, keep the contact and just reschedule for dates in the new year that would suit those international, our international friends. And actually just cookie cut it essentially for some relevant dates in the new year, rather than just pull a plug on it completely. Last week, that's true, reference that we did set budgets and we did have a go at cutting international relations, which didn't succeed from memory. And so if we're going to have a budget, I believe we should use it effectively, and a trip like this would use it effectively. So my mind, I'm going to oppose the whole let's not go at all approach and maybe have an open mind to actually rescheduling it for dates in the new year. I see the value of keeping the dates for the post-election as a priority. I do see that argument, and I think that would be very important. But yeah, as far as international travel goes, I'm open to that as well. Thank you, Deputy Mayor.
Councillor Meehan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hang on, just get my instructions. I'd like to give notice that I'd second Councillor Harper's, if this fails, Councillor Harper, motion to 1A, but I'd also like to give notice of an amendment to 2, and that would be that the Council note the expenses of the Mayor's partner and meals, accommodation and international travel will be covered according to the Council's elected blah, blah, blah. The point being that it's been a lot said about travelling with COVID. I, for one, have been running away from COVID for the last 3 years since I first hit Wuhan. And I can say I've successfully travelled with large teams, including the Olympic team with thousands of athletes and supporters, and nobody got COVID. So travelling with COVID, if the right protocols are put in place, if the right care and protection is done, we don't have to fear travelling. It's no different than walking out your door down the road. So I would be voting against the motion that's on the floor and looking to move and the amendment.
Thank you. Councillor Beattie.
May I just ask a question, Madam Chair? My understanding is the recommendation that's up on the screen only stops the travel for November. It doesn't stop another timing.
Yes, that's correct.
So when we're voting, we're only just saying no, not to November, but it's okay to organise another trip in February. Okay, I just wanted to clarify that because Councillor Dennison didn't seem to be aware of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Beattie. Councillor McCarlard.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was actually going to pop up because I was having the same concerns that Councillor Beattie raised up earlier. I think, since that has been clarified for us, I think I'll be in favour of voting for this and putting, transferring or shifting the date to a later date, probably earlier in the year. And I understand that there are timings, the issue of timing around an election year, and that the Mayor needs to be invested, especially having a new council coming in, and as mentioned earlier, the 2 new Maori Wards councillors. And as for someone as well who's got an appreciation for international relations, given my background in it, I see benefits in the Mayor travelling and actually building partnerships and relationships, or strengthening relationship with our partners. So since that has been clarified for us today, by Councillor Beattie, so I'll be supporting this in favour of a different date. Sorry. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just going to make a brief comment. I agree with many of the comments that have been said, actually, for both sides of the argument. I particularly agree with Councillor Harper's comment around the Prime Minister's leadership. And if she's travelling, then I think it does actually set a precedent for elected members and sort of official delegations to be travelling. And the Prime Minister's got a lot of wisdom, so I'm happy to acknowledge that. The comments made from Councillor Dennison around the timing, I also agree with, and so on that basis, I'm happy to support the recommendation. With the intent that I read is that actually it's about deferring it to the new year. I agree that in terms of the timing for the last quarter of this year, it's calendar year, not financial year, is certainly the priority is around the election, post-election induction program. It's about establishing the committee structure, the chairs, the things like appointing deputy mayor and getting them inducted into a very important role. But also it's about team cohesion of a new term of council, and it's about making sure that actually everybody comes together and starts the term off right. We saw at the beginning of this term a little bit of a fragmented induction because some people were unwell, some people had other commitments that didn't align well with the induction program. There were various reasons that people couldn't fully participate, and I think it did impact on sort of getting the team off the ground. So I do think that's the number one priority. I absolutely support the intent of the trip. I think it's a really great opportunity, and as Councillor Hapeta said, we haven't sent a delegation for a number of years now, and to formalise the relationship, particularly with Wageningen, is a great milestone. So I'm very supportive of the opportunity, and it would be great to see that eventuate in the new year. Councillor Beattie, would you like to make a comment?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will make a comment. I do support the recommendation. I think it's around priority, and I certainly do support the international travel. I think that our relationships are really important. But there are 4 things to take in consideration. As one, there'll be a new deputy mayor, there'll be a new CE, and there is also a possibility that your CE might not be actually even in office because of appointments and timings and things like that. So you'll have plus a new council, new Maori ward councillors, you've got a whole new council team, and you don't want to start delaying committees and things like that. So I do not see any issues of moving this trip into February, March next year, or when is appropriate next year. It's just, I think you have to take council as the priority, not this trip this time. Thank you.
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and not wanting to repeat what's already been said, but you would have gathered from the direction of my questions that my concern was about the timing and the impact on the new council. I'm very much in support of these relationships, particularly the Missoula relationship, which has gone from strength to strength over the last few years. It's very important to this council, and Wageningen is an opening opportunity. So absolutely supportive of our work there. But I think my hesitation is that it's easy to assume that council rolls on and business as usual will continue, but that is not the reality. A new council is appointed in October, and some of the people around the table will stay the same and some of them won't. And it's a hugely difficult time for officers to manage is that induction period when we have new members coming to the chamber who will have to arrange their diaries to be able to accommodate an induction proceedings. And we've heard already, I think in your comments, Madam Chair, that was difficult in the last term of council. So why we would make that more difficult by putting a time pressure on it of international travel for the mayor, I really don't understand. And so for me, I think we need to keep that October-November time period as flexible as possible internally to allow an effective induction procedure for all of the council so that we learn to work together and we set up good processes and procedures going into the term. So on that basis, I'll be supporting the recommendation that's on the table now. Thank you.
Councillor Hancock.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. Can I just perhaps, I'm just wondering whether the comments that are being made at the moment have perhaps, and I'm just seeking a comment perhaps from officers just around probably a key point in terms of this trip is really about the celebration of 40 years with Missoula. And so therefore, I would just like some comment around, or some commentary around, is it appropriate for us to delay?
I'm actually comfortable that those questions were asked earlier around the importance of it being this year. I think Councillor Hapeta has had a few questions around that, so I'm comfortable that that's been addressed. If you'd like to make a comment, you're welcome to do so now.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Just very briefly, I guess it's really just a matter of a reminder to everybody that I think a touch point in terms of this trip really is around our relationship with Missoula and reaffirming that relationship. This is not just about a City Council trip to both of our sister cities overseas. It also includes our key partners who will be seeking some benefits from the trip itself. So those key partners, of course, are Massey, CEDA, and also IPC. So it's not just about us. Thank you.
Councillor Finlay. Okay, Councillor Mann, I see you're in the queue, but you have already made comments, so I'm not going to allow a second round. We can talk about that at morning tea. Is there anyone else who hasn't spoken who is wishing to speak? Councillor Naylor, would you like a right of reply?
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the comments elected members have made. I do just want to make one clarification. Last week we did debate the size of the international relations budget. We've got a bit over $500,000 in there, and that has obviously quadrupled in the time while I've been around the table. I'm not proposing what I'm proposing to revisit that decision. I accept that the majority of this council has decided they're comfortable with the size of the international relations budget. I don't always like the majority of decisions, but I do accept them. The reason that I've proposed this today is primarily around timing, and I think many of you have commented on that. It is for the new council to determine where that might fit. I don't necessarily think it's appropriate for us to be saying when might be appropriate for travel to happen, but there's obviously money in the budget for travel to occur. I think the points that Councillor Johnson made around perception and the current pandemic are also good reasons to defer. But primarily, my primary reason for putting this forward is around the timing in terms of the post-election program and establishing a healthy environment and a good environment for new members in terms of the new triennium.
So with the right of reply done, I'll now invite you to vote. And that has carried 9 in favour and 5 against. We've counted your vote, but it's just not appearing. It's saying that you're offline. I can assure you, Councillor, we have a record of your vote. It is noted in the final count being Thank you, councillors. We are now going to adjourn for morning tea, and so we'll be back here at 10:35. Is that 15 minutes? Yes.
Kia ora tātou, welcome back. Right, we're up to number 7 on our order paper around reports. It's around the review of Trustees 2022. I'm just going to shorten some of the text that's on screen because it's an essay. The Council resolves and approves the alterations to the trust deed for the Globe Theatre Trust and stating the annual account of the Trust. Number 2, that we approve the alterations for the trust deed of the Regent Theatre Trust, stating the annual account of the Trust. Number 3, that the Council approves the alterations to the trust deed for the Tamanua Museums Trust, stating the annual account of the Trust. Number 4, that the Council note the proposed alterations of the trust deed listed in recommendations 1 to 3, and approval of 3/4 of the trustees of the Trust Board before the deed can be amended. Number 5, that Council note the trustees for the Palmerston North Performing Arts Trust and the Palmerston North JC Trust have been reviewed, but no changes required. And then finally, number 6, that the Council note that the trust deed for the Palmerston North Heritage Trust has been reviewed and requires further investigation. Right, we have a memo there from our Governance Manager. Hannah, over to you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I've also asked Sarah Claridge, our Democracy and Governance Advisor, to sit with me since she's been working closely with the lawyers and also with the CCOs on this. Members, you'll remember that Council resolved to review these trust deeds for currency in light of the changes to the Trusts Act, according to the criteria that have been set out again for you in 2.3 of the report. It has come to my attention that there is a change that we need to make before receiving this today, and that was actually in the recommendations that the Mayor referred to just there, and that is in section 7.3a of each of the trust deeds. So that's the 7.3a for the Globe Theatre Trust deed, also for the Regent and also for Te Manua, that the intention was not to fully delete the sentence but to simply delete the word audited, so that the financial accounts are still submitted to those trust boards AGMs, and then of course also to charity services, so only to remove the word audited rather than all of the financial accounts. So we've adjusted the recommendation that was on the screen there to bring that into account. My apologies that was missed. So that's on page, the first reference, and it's similar for all three, is on page 48 of your papers. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Beattie.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you, Hannah and Sarah. Page 35, under the purposes, this is Globe Theatre, we're deleting preparing and consultation with Council a strategic plan and annual plan. So where does the SOI and the budgets and all that sit in? So how do we make sure they will be preparing?
So that will still be a requirement of the CCOs through the LGA. We're just avoiding the duplication.
That's right, that's fine, thank you.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. Just the one question I have is around the rotation of trustees. I think in the report it said that line aligns with our new appointment policy that's just been updated. Does our appointment policy preclude the retention of these clauses which requires the trusts to have some rotation of trustees?
So the appointments policy only talks about how we appoint trustees to the CCO boards. This rotation of trustee clause is only found in the trust deeds.
So why are we proposing to change that? Because my understanding is that enables some regeneration in terms of personnel, which I think is a good thing. So I'm just trying to understand why we would want to remove that, and would we have then the potential for someone to just sit on there for a long time without that being reviewed?
So our appointments policy appoints someone up to 3 years. So currently they're appointed up to 3 years, but they quite often will find that they're having to be reappointed halfway through that term because of this rotation of trustee clause.
Okay. So they would still have the process of being put forward and being reappointed. So that is still reviewed. Okay, perfect, thanks.
Yeah, it's not stopping the term of the trustee. It's not it's not extending the term of the trustee. It's just giving them the 3-year term, and then we'll reappoint if we want to.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question was just around the removal of the clauses around audit requirement and whether that's been looked at through a fundraising type lens and whether there might be any unintended consequences there.
So the requirement, sorry, I'll restart again, Councillor, through you, Mr. Mayor. So trusts can still choose to have their accounts either reviewed or audited. What we're doing is removing the requirement for them to be audited, and the trust may well choose to have them audited, as you point out, Councillor, for the purposes of applying for funding from an organisation which requires audited accounts. What we're trying to do is remove the requirement from the deeds perspective of having audited accounts, so that in the future, should council wish to exempt under the LGA, that the LGA could be used rather than the deed.
Right, thanks for clarification, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's a question about the Globe amendment and clause 5.1 in the table. It says that a reduction to the number of ordinary trustees, just from 5 to 4, came from the Trust Board after recent difficulties with appointing trustees. Now, I sit on the appointments panel and I don't recall difficulties with appointing trustees. I know we went back to market for more, but we got a really good selection. So can we clarify what that's for and what that's seeking to address?
Thank you, Councillor. I also questioned this. So you're correct. The most recent recruitment round, we were successful. The previous one, we had to go back out to market, and it has been the board's experience that they have felt that they've struggled to fill it. So maybe a perception more than the current situation.
So, Hannah, just to follow up then, do you feel there's any risk with reducing the number of trustees? Or are you happy with that recommendation?
We don't. The trust themselves are comfortable that that would be a sufficient number to fulfil the needs on their board. From our perspective, the only question that I was looking at was when it came to decision making, how would that impact having an even number over an odd number? And their deed expects that they would be taking consensus and only majority where it was necessary. The majority would remain unchanged. By dropping that number, you'd still have the same number of votes. So no concern from us as officers.
Okay, thank you.
All right, councillors, no more questions? Great, okay. So we'll bring the recommendations up. I'm quite happy to move those, second by the Deputy Mayor. And I'll open it up for any comments. Right, we'll go to the... Councillor Bowen.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Now, I just wanted to comment that I think this has been a good housekeeping exercise. It certainly does no harm to raise the questions. It was required by the changes to legislation, but I'm actually quite pleased to see that the changes that have come back are of a minor administrative nature in general, and support that this was a good exercise to go through. So very happy to support the recommendations.
All right, councillors, we'll vote, please. That's passed 15 votes for, none against. Right, we'll move through to number 8, which is around remits to the Local Government New Zealand AGM. And we have a paper there from our governance manager. Take it as being read. And these are around 2 of our neighbouring Lower North Island councils. That one is around our requesting support. In saying that though, the remit has probably already gone to the Local Government New Zealand National Council, but it will give delegates that attend the AGM some sort of idea on what the council feels around these two remits. So the New Plymouth District Council requests that LGNZ adopt a policy and constitutional change to poll the membership on any significant issues affecting local government prior to entering into any formal delegation or agreement with central government, the government of the day. So there's that one, and then the Hutt City is requesting a nationwide working group around actions and enforcements with the Land Transport Act around unauthorised street and drag racing, something which we're well aware of. Right, well, I'll open it up for both, comments on both, and Councillor Hancock.
Yeah, thanks, Mr Mayor. Just in terms of the New Plymouth remit, I don't feel really comfortable around supporting that. I think that there was one particular topic which triggered that, obviously very contentious around Three Waters. I fail to see that polling will resolve any future issues. It's likely to be time-consuming and may also lead to further division amongst councils across New Zealand. Councils around New Zealand actually did provide feedback to LGNZ in terms of Three Waters, and some changes were made accordingly. So I don't think the polling aspect is going to support better outcomes. In terms of the Hutt matter, I'm quite happy to support that on the basis that it's a national issue and we require better alignment across TAs for better outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Just a little bit of housekeeping. I should have moved and seconded these to get any sort of comment underway. Number two, look, I'm happy to move number two around endorsing the remit proposal from Hutt City. Second, thank you, Councillor Hancock. And on the first one, I'll see what the room wants to do. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm happy to move that Council does not endorse the 2022 remit proposal from New Plymouth District Council.
Okay, is there a seconder to that? Thank you, Councillor Hancock. All right, I'll open it up for further comments. So the Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I think the second recommendation is a little bit more straightforward, and I'm happy to support that recommendation that we endorse that. Obviously, it's a very topical issue for us at the moment. In terms of recommendation one, the main reason that I'm not supporting the proposal from New Plymouth District Council is along the lines of what Councillor Hancock has outlined. I believe that the remit is setting LGNZ up to encourage division. I think the other thing we need to think about is that LGNZ is a membership organisation that is also there to progress the I guess the long-term vision for local government. They are there to advocate for the sector, but they have a much more, I would say that they have a longer-term view on things. Often we can get really engaged in local issues that are hot topics for particular communities, and sometimes that does result in a little bit of tunnel vision. I think that this organisation is there to take a wider view and to actually look past things like election cycles or what's sort of front of mind. I believe they can do both, but I would say that the essence of this remit has come from, as Councillor Hancock identified, the Three Waters debate, which is very divisive, and I've seen many comments that are quite short-sighted around it, and so I think that actually if there was a topic that was coming up that, first of all, they had to go to members to establish a position on, they're also missing the opportunity to consider the effects in terms of 10, 20, 30, 50 years' time, and actually what's going to be best for the sector, making evidence-based decisions, putting research behind the views. And so I think that that's what is proposed is going to put people into a box with a very limited way forward. So I don't support it.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. To the second one first, certainly happy to support it. I was a little bit disappointed to see the regendering of the street racing issue to only one gender. I personally don't think that it's just boys racing. And in fact, if you looked at the age demographic, certainly in terms of biological age, I don't think that boys is necessarily appropriate either. To the first matter, I think there's kind of a couple ways that we can look at the proposal from New Plymouth. One is whether it's kind of a proxy and slightly late referendum on Three Waters. The other way to look at it, I think, is whether it's possibly a note to local government New Zealand about how they might better actually approach achieving buy-in and working with their membership in future. And on that basis, I'm actually quite happy to support it. I think there's been some comments made that that this might create division within LGNZ. I think that happened about 6 to 12 months ago when they didn't do this. So I think it actually gives a much better way forward for LGNZ to be working with their membership and getting a clear view on those matters that might be substantial before signing on to agreements that become actually quite then disruptive, both for central government's agenda as well as local government's agenda. So the way that the motions have been put, I will not be voting in support of recommendation 1, but happy to vote for recommendation 2.
Thank you, councillors. Look, just before I go back to the... Oh, sorry, Councillor Dennison.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was just going to speak. I'm happy with the way the recommendations are moving, but I just wanted to make the point around where New Plymouth's position has been. Unfortunately, a lot of local authorities never got to choose a position on the Three Waters through the consultation that Minister Mahuta circulated through DIA to actually confirm and have enough information to make an informed decision at the time with the opt-in, opt-out option available. And unfortunately, local government, I think, did jump the gun, indicating that it would promote a position without having a feeling from the members. So I think there was a shortfall there, but I don't think this remit would actually resolve that the way that process happened. I don't think it was a good process necessarily. And even now, as a city, we haven't formed a formal view on what we would have promoted as an option, because that choice was taken away from us when it became mandatory to vest Three Waters and to central government. So into the new entities that have been created, I should say. So I don't think it was great form on many parts from many of our strategic partners in this, and so, but I don't think this is going to resolve those past hurts. That'd be the comments I'd wish to make. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, councillor. Look, before I pass back to the movers for a right of reply, I think the second one's been well documented in this chamber, and I'd be surprised if we don't get a majority to support that. And it does need a national lens over it. Otherwise, we're all just having a little chip away at biting the elephant off in very, very small bites. The first one, and look, I have some sympathy with New Plymouth District Council, and I understand that they do support Three Waters. I think really what their key role, that the key aspect here is not necessarily Three Waters, but it's the heads of agreement that was signed with the government of the day and a specific clause within it. And I hear the messages around the table that you're never going to get consensus. And Councillor Barrett's right, the division's already there, and I think that's going to play out even more so in the coming months before local body elections, sadly, I would say. But look, the key role of local government New Zealand is advocacy, and they felt it, the National Council felt at the time that having a heads of agreement and being in the tent rather than outside the tent throwing stones was the way to go. Unfortunately, I don't think that was, and if hindsight's a great thing, that wasn't well communicated to the wider membership. And although I'm not sure a poll will have the desired outcome, there does need to be a change in the way things have occurred, because we're going to see some fallout, and that's really unfortunate at a time when we're going through so much change and reform. So I really have sympathy with the Mayor of New Plymouth and what he's trying to do. It's perhaps just the poll, and it could create even have some unforeseen consequences where people start taking real sides. I know that's already happening in some cases, but it's probably a signal to the leadership of our advocacy body that they need to communicate better with everybody. All right, Councillor Naylor, you've slipped in late there.
It's just a point of clarity, Mr Mayor. The first, Councillor Barrett mentioned that he wouldn't be supporting the first recommendation. Just to be clear, that the first recommendation is that Council does not endorse the remit, and the other one, yep. Yeah, I just thought it...
I think he was pretty clear on that, and with his debate as well. Yep. So, councillors, I'll go back to the first one and to the mover for any right of reply. No need. Okay. So what we'll do is we'll vote on number 1 first, please. And that has passed 11 votes for, 3 against and 1 abstention. Okay, we'll go through to the second one, and this is around endorsing Hutt City's street racer remit. So I don't need a right of reply, so we'll vote, please. It's passed 15 votes for and none against. Thank you. Right. We'll move through to number 9, and that's around alteration to the Acacia Birch trust deed. And there's a paper there on page 87 of our papers from our governance manager, Hannah.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I've got Sarah Claridge with me again as advisor on this. We're happy to take any questions.
Any questions from the floor? There is. Councillor Butt.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you, Hannah, for the report. Just wanting to clarify one point, which is 2.3. The last sentence says the community trust's primary purpose will be to seek additional funding for Acacia Birch. To my understanding, when we discussed bringing the administration in-house, it was to save some money or make some savings. So are we ignoring that point, or by asking for additional funding?
No.
Could I just ask the councillor, where is he? What are you referring to around additional funding?
That's what I'm asking, that what does it mean that the primary purpose is to get some additional funding?
Of external fundraising? Yeah, the trust has always done that.
Okay, sorry, I misunderstood the point. I thought we are asking for more money from the council.
No, this my understanding, and I'm not sure who can speak to this from the officers.
Okay. Sorry, the community trust is to be set up as a way of raising additional funds, external funds from other sources outside of council.
All right, sorry.
Perhaps for clarity, the word external funding should have been used instead of additional.
Thank you.
Yeah, so an example would be seats in the garden, umbrellas for the courtyard, those sorts of things. Yeah. Councillor Barrett.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Just interested if there is any discussion had about whether the scope might broaden either to kind of include more generally heritage aspects of the built environment in the community, or likewise kind of community interests in public and open space.
My understanding, councillor, is there is a report coming to Arts, Culture and Heritage that will consider that. So
in relation to this specific trust?
So this trust focus will be on seeking the funding, but that there will be an advisory board separate to that.
Thank you. And just to clarify then, the intent around that advisory board sits focused purely on Acacia Birch, or is it a wider lens?
Heritage space for Acacia Birch, yes.
For Acacia Birch.
For Acacia Birch, okay.
It's with a heritage advisory function.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, and I don't think it's a board, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's a panel or a group, not dissimilar to some of our other panels.
Great, thank you.
Councillor Beattie.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. 3.1, the members of the board, it's got not less than 5, and this Acacia Birch has always been the one that we've had quite a bit of trouble recruiting, so should that be 4 and leave it to 7? You can have leave it to 7, but to cover themselves to make it no less than 4?
The only comment I have to make on that, councillor, is that this deed was looked at by the board themselves and they didn't bring that up as an issue of concern.
Okay, as I say, we've had issues with it, so we've done it with the Globe, so I wondered why we wouldn't protect. I mean, they can have up to 7, so it's just protecting them if they get down to that minimum of 4.
I think 5 was considered a good number for a trust board, really.
Yeah, it is.
And it'll be the community trust who will be appointing these their own members on.
Council.
No involvement of council at all in the appointment process.
Good. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's the key bit of advice, is we're out of it. So it's community led, and they will look and decide what's needed, and I think we're already starting to see, and I'll be careful what I say and how I couch this, we're already starting to see some improvements. Okay. Right, then no further questions, none online. We'll get the recommendations up. Thank you, Hannah and Sarah. That council approve the alterations to the Acacia Birch Trustee Detachment 1. I'll look for a mover on that. Thank you, Councillor Barrett. A seconder. Thank you, Councillor Hancock. Do you want to speak to this?
Only briefly. I'm happy to support. I think the reasons have been well laid out in the paper and explained to us. Probably the wider comment that I would have is I'm a little bit uncertain about the best model going forward, being that each individual building or property kind of has their own community trusts sitting around it. And some of the questions about critical mass, I do wonder if we had more of a citywide lens through some of our trusts that were focused on heritage buildings or trusts that were focused on open space might actually help us get some better outcomes, and both in terms of funding and in terms of activity. But it very much seems that the community has a desire, at least at this stage, for having a kind of one building, one trust approach, and if that's where we're at, then we'll support that.
Thank you, Councillor. Right, no other comments. I don't think you need a right of reply. We'll put it to the vote. Thank you. That's passed, 15 votes for and none against. Right, we'll move through to number 10, which is a paper on e-scooters, and staff are seeking some clarification on a past resolution. There's a paper there, page 99, and Peter Ridge, our policy expert on scooters, is with us.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So yes, we're here today to get some clarification on the decision that was made back in April. We just want to make sure we've understood the intentions of councillors correctly. The wording of the resolution as it was put back in April is generally clear, but there is some scope for interpretation regarding the limits on e-scooter numbers. So we wanted to bring this back and make sure we're proceeding correctly. So the first and most literal interpretation would be to remove the limit on the number of e-scooters from within the permit. This would mean redrafting the permit and taking out that number altogether. If we did that, it would mean that the operators can choose any number of scooters to operate, and we would not be able to control or regulate that in any way. The second interpretation is kind of in line with what we thought the discussions were at the council meeting, and this would be to discuss with each operator what that number could be. So again, no limit, but that the limit would be set in negotiation with the operator. If that's the intention, then we would go back to the operators and discuss with them what they would like to have in their permit, and the permit would have a number that they feel comfortable with. There could also be a third or even a fourth interpretation, not going to venture what that might be, but if that is the case, then we just welcome that clarity from the council today. Thank you.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. I'm just wanting to know, having no limit on the amount of scooters, how that can be open to interpretation?
The discussion at the time was talking about taking away limits or possibly having a much higher limit. I think what we wanted to be clear about is that we could redraft the permit and take out the number altogether, or we could take away the limit but still set a number. So we want to make sure which of those two approaches you were favouring.
Okay, so have officers had a chance to go back and review the debate at the April meeting?
Yes, we have, yeah.
Okay. I'll leave the rest to comment, thanks.
Okay, there's no further questions. Thank you, Peter. If I could just ask the officers, what was actually passed? What was the what? Okay, thank you. That we do not limit the amount of e-scooter operators or the amount of scooters in the city, and the Chief Executive report back in a year's time with more data and look at consulting then. Okay. I'm of the view that the first one probably suits the recommendation, and okay, moved by Councillor Naylor, seconded by Councillor Michelard, and over to you, Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. I'm really clear about the intent and of that recommendation. It was actually moved by Councillor Dingwell, who's not here with us today. But part of that debate included a variety of views, and some of the views that were expressed weren't the majority views. So, I recall there was actually a vote that failed through a lack of majority that was an 8-8 vote. So under democracy, the instruction that gets the most votes is the one that proceeds. And I've said already earlier today that I don't always like the majority view, but I do accept it. And I think this is one of those situations where the majority view was very clear. No limit means no limit. And I think that is the instruction that was given and should be carried out.
Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. One of the points that were raised last time this came forward is that we haven't had a good 12 months with COVID disruptions and lockdowns, that we didn't have a good set of data for a whole year's period to actually work out the amount of use and the likely parameters. And so therefore it was in a year's time to report back with more data was a real strong intent behind it. And Councillor Naylor is quite right. There was a recommendation that lapsed because of lack of a majority that had the two trains of thoughts been put there. My discomfort is of removing the limit on all providers, meaning one can actually monopolise the market by actually just pouring out a whole lot of supply, because at the time I understood we have 3 operating in the city with a possibility of a 4th, and we're talking about numbers in the city being potentially 800 or 900, I thought from memory, being about right for the city. So therefore, if we start taking the number too much higher off a dedicated number, we could actually have a missed weight of providers and dictating, I guess, the price point, or the availability and I guess where the prices are positioned. So I was more of a line in that debate and would still keep my positioning of not removing the cap to just being unlimited, and that I would have preferred the or option of actually just increasing the number just for the year period at least, so we can get a bunch of annual data that's a bit more that can tell a story rather than the stop-start approach that we've had over the last couple of years. So I'm going to oppose taking off the limits. That was consistent with my arguments at committee, and why the moving of this to take all limits off, because that was probably the intent, but that's my position. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Beattie.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm really disappointed this has come back to council. I mean, the recommendation is quite clear that we do not limit the amount of e-scooters or the amount of scooters in the city this year, and we've asked for the data. And we shouldn't be, this is giving councillors an unfair opportunity to relitigate. And I just don't think we should move either of them. We should just go back and say it's quite clear. I just stress that again. We do not want the limit of e-scooter, do not limit the amount of e-scooters operators or the amount of scooters in the city. So what don't you understand about that? I'm sorry. And as I say, I'm really disappointed this has come back. So I don't think we should move either. I think we should just disregard this and stick with our original intent of our recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor. That's yeah. Look, before I jump to others in the queue there, I thought this was very clear too, so I am quite surprised that we've got a paper back up, and there is an element of relitigation here, which is not somewhere this council, in fact this chamber, goes. Look, the data is king, and we wanted to get. That's why the whole reason the original motion that I had to find was passed, and And when talking to one of the operators, CEO, who happened to be at a tech event I was at, that the commercial reality is we're number 7 in New Zealand. We're not going to be swamped, because there was a fear we're going to be swamped with scooters everywhere. The commercial realities will sink in. So that's why we needed a bit of data, by the way, too. Look, our licence to use and the conditions, and the officers have done a really good job on that, is really tight. And sometimes it's not being first is good in the space. The speed governors, the places of use, the hours of use, and being able to collect them rather than using their app model, which is what other cities have got. So we've probably got the best out of everything here, but we still need some more data to decide exactly what the final makeup will be. So I'm supportive of the recommendation. I do have an element of sympathy for Councillor Beattie. I don't really know why we're discussing it, but we are. So I urge you to support the recommendation. Thank you. Councillor Barrett.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I suppose I'll speak to the substance of the e-scooters provision in the city and perhaps less around process. In terms of where I'm at on this, I'm very much of the view that, at some point in the future, limits are going to be useful and should be imposed. We live in a city with unlimited numbers of cars, and I don't know, you can have a judge on how that works or not. In terms of how cluttered up our streets get, I do think in terms of introducing a new transport mode, it's worth having a limit at some point in the future, but that limit should absolutely be informed by data. The providers do need some breathing space. I think it was quite clear at the outset that 200 per operator was not a long-term economic proposition for them, and I don't think we should be in the position of forcing operators out by setting a cap so low that they have to run at a loss just to be in the game. And I'm quite comfortable with confirming the direction given that at least until April 2023, we don't actually need a cap. I think that the companies are very well aware that they need to maintain community and social license around this. If they flood the market, they know what's going to happen. They're going to get a backlash and they're going to be gone. So I think there will be a high element of prudence shown by the operators, and I think our staff are well aware of that too, so should be in a position to negotiate something beyond what is there that is effective until April, and that we can then proceed on the basis of some actual data at that point. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a brief comment is that I think everybody interprets things differently, and the intent of this paper is to put clarification around a recommendation. I don't think that officers are going out of their way to waste our time. I think that there is genuinely an opportunity to be really clear around what the intent was. I personally don't agree with it, but I'm supporting this recommendation because the recommendation is to provide clarity, and that was the intent of the decision that was made. So it's actually elected members that we have the decision right now to relitigate or not relitigate, but the purpose of this paper is to provide clarification. The resolution in front of us is giving effect to what was the majority view of that decision. So I will support it because it is about giving clarification.
Right, a reply back to you, Councillor.
Yeah, thank you. I was also quite surprised when I saw this paper, because I thought the wording of no limit for the amount of scooter operators and no limit for the amount of scooters was quite clear. And I think with the benefit of online meetings, officers can go back and actually see what was said and see, listen to the discussion, but they need to be, in doing so, they need to be mindful that not every view that is expressed at the table ends up being a majority view and doesn't always, some of those views aren't necessarily in line with the majority decision. So yes, I don't think this paper coming here should have been an opportunity to relitigate the decision. I think if there is new information that officers would have and they would asking us to rescind the decision, then I understand that we would need a 75% majority, a 75% majority for that. But we don't have any new information here, so this resolution confirms the wording of the original resolution from April.
Thank you. We will vote. Just cancel it. I do that all the time. Okay, that's passed 15 votes for and against. Right, we'll move through now to number 11, which is around fees and charges, confirmation of those following our public consultation. Our Finance Manager, Steve Patterson. Steve.
Yes, Mr Mayor and Councillors, just a routine report in some respects. You approved some increased charges back in April, and amongst them were these ones for the planning and trade waste areas. They were subject to a period of public consultation. That period has been completed. We received no submissions, and so the recommendation is that those fees that you approved back in April be confirmed.
Thank you, Steve. Look, any red herrings there? There's a lot of... Sorry. Is there any red herrings here we need to know about? Anything?
No, they would have been drawn to your attention back in April.
Yeah. Could I just ask, just around the trade waste, are we actually reducing some of those fees?
Yes, in some cases, because of the nature of the formulas that are used for that are included in the bylaw, they vary from year to year. Some years they go up, some down, depending upon the volumes and the like.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Bailey.
No, sorry, I was just going to move the recommendations.
Well, you can.
Okay, I'm comfortable to move it.
All right, moved, seconded. Councillor Naylor. All right, Councillor Beattie, would you like to speak to this?
Yes, thank you. I'll be quick. These came to our committee and they've already been gone through, so this is just straightforward. And as Steve said, there's been no submissions, so it's a straightforward administration as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you. Okay, we will look to vote. That has passed 13 votes for and 1 abstention. Okay, we'll move through to number 12, which is the council work schedule, which is looking very skinny. I'll just take that as being read. Are there any comments to that? Anything from staff? No? Okay, I'll look to move it. Seconded by the Deputy Mayor. And we'll vote, please. Okay, that is passed, 15 votes for, none against. We'll now go to our committee recommendations from the month, and I'll ask our Environmental Sustainability Committee Chair, Councillor Barrett, to speak to that.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Pleased to move the Part 1 Public Environmental Sustainability Committee recommendations from its 18 May 2022 meeting and call for a seconder.
And seconded by the Deputy Chair, Councillor Butt. Are there any matters arising there? There being none, nothing online, we will vote. That has passed 15 votes for, none against. Right, we will now move to our second committee recommendation, which is around Finance and Audit Committee. I'll ask the Chair, Councillor Beattie, to speak to that, please.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move the recommendations from the Part 1 Public Finance and Audit Committee meeting from the 25th of May be approved.
Thank you. And look for a seconder, the Deputy Chair, Councillor Naylor. And are there any matters arising? There being none, we will vote, please. Okay, it's passed 15 votes for and none against. Right, we will now look to move into part 2, and I'll look to move that the public be excluded for reasons of third-party commercial negotiations, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. No questions on that. We will vote, please. That is passed, 15 votes for and none against. Right, we'll just wait a couple of moments while we just get the meeting tech and room ready.